The Christian age is coming to an end. Our belief in late-stage Christian values, Enlightenment values, is wavering. The lamp which once lit our sky has flickered out, plunging us into darkness. Now a great struggle ensues, the struggle to define the new age, the struggle to direct humanity upon a new course, the struggle for new values. Zarathustra gripped the tree under which the youth sat and spoke thus. If I wished to shake this tree with my hands, I should not be able to do it, but the wind, which we do not see, tortures and bends it in whatever direction it pleases. It is by invisible hands that we are bent and tortured worst. Then the youth arose, disconcerted, and said, I hear Zarathustra, and just now I was thinking of him. Zarathustra answered, Why should that frighten you? But it is the same with man as it is with the tree. The more he seeks to rise into the heights and light, the more vigorously do his roots struggle earthward, downward, into the dark and deep, into evil. Yes, into evil, cried the youth. How is it possible that you have discovered my soul? To understand the tremendous struggle which is taking place all around us, we must first understand what values are. Values, fundamentally, are the expressions of various wills. To desire something is to deem it valuable in the service of a certain will. Instincts are complex hierarchies of interrelated wills, desires, and value judgments, which, over millions of years of evolution, have proved to be most useful in service of the fundamental will to life, or as Nietzsche would describe it, the will to power. Each individual is made up of various conflicting wills and instincts, just as we are made up of various cells which could each be considered to be life forms on their own. But ultimately, one will, one instinct must prevail over the others for an organism to function properly. Groups, like individuals, can be viewed as a collection of often conflicting wills organized behind one or several wills, instincts, values. This is how Carl Jung arrived at his theory of archetypes. For him, religions are instinctual value systems, expressing the most profound values of a culture. Gods are artistic representations of archetypal instincts, ancient, profound wills which transcend the individual. In Man and His Symbols, Jung wrote, inner motives spring from a deep source that is not made by consciousness and is not under its control. In the mythology of earlier times, these forces were called mana, or spirits, demons, and gods. Individuals degenerate and become decadent when they lose contact with their instincts, when their will becomes exhausted and their ideals die. So it is with civilizations. Civilizations collapse when their gods die. The most famous passage from Nietzsche's Zarathustra is as follows. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to cleanse ourselves? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? This passage is from Zarathustra's parable on the madman and predicts the collapse of our civilization and value systems in the wake of the death of the Christian God. In reply to this passage, Carl Jung wrote, It has for some ears the same eerie sound as that ancient cry which came echoing over the sea to mark the end of the nature gods. He continues, Life has gone out of the churches, and it will never go back. The gods will not reinvest dwellings that once they have left. The same thing happened before, in the time of the Roman Caesars, when paganism was dying. According to legend, the captain of a ship passing between two Greek islands heard a great sound of lamentation and a loud voice crying, "Great Pan is dead." When this man reached Rome, he demanded an audience with the emperor, so important was his news. Then came this message, "Pan is dead. Great Pan, who is God, is dead. Only man remains alive." After that, the one God became one man, and this was Christ, one man for all. But now that too is gone. Now every man has to carry God. The descent of spirit into matter is complete. Carl Jung noted that God, or the gods, had died before. For Jung, the cyclical death and rebirth of God could be seen in the symbolism of the zodiac. The death and rebirth of God, whether Osiris, Dionysus, or Christ, is celebrated seasonally. Mirroring the daily path of the sun, God dies and descends into the underworld in the winter, only to be reborn again in the spring as the sun is reborn each dawn. But in addition to the Earth's seasonal rotation through the zodiac, the Earth's axis also makes a slow, circular procession, spending roughly 2,000 years in each house of the zodiac. We briefly touched upon this astrological symbolism earlier in the series when Hercules freed Prometheus and took the heavens on his shoulders, becoming the axis of the Earth and symbolically replacing Prometheus as the god of the new age. This symbolism occurs again with Christ, who becomes the axis mundi upon the cross, which is widely interpreted as the tree of life in Christian theology. On the cross, Christ became the God and archetypal man of the new age. It so happens that Christ was born during the transition from the great year of Aries into the great year of Pisces. The first Christian symbol was a fish meant to represent Christ. This fish was often accompanied by the ancient Greek word for fish, ichthus, which is an acronym for Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. Now, roughly 2,000 years later, the axis of the Earth is moving out of the constellation of Pisces and into Aquarius. Jung wrote, "The vernal equinox is moving out of the sign of Pisces into the sign of Aquarius, just as it did out of Taurus, the old bull gods, into Aries, the ram-horned gods, and then out of Aries, the sacrificed lamb, into Pisces." The birth of Christ catalyzed the dethroning of the classical empires, represented in the Bible as horned beasts, and the demonization of the classical gods. Nietzsche called this event the first transvaluation of all values, a reversal of every moral valuation which had come before. For Jung, the two fish of the Pisces sign represented Christ and Satan, and the Aion of Pisces was characterized by the tension between these two opposing forces. The first half of the Christian age focused on Christ, the Spirit, the Saint, the Good, the Kingdom of Heaven, while the second half was marked by the Enlightenment and the birth of science, a movement towards the earth and matter, and a focus on the figure of the genius. Goethe's Faust perhaps best represents the spirit of this age. Faust, an elderly scholar, turns away from his esoteric, spiritual pursuits, finding that they have yielded him nothing, and makes a bargain with Mephistopheles to regain his youth and enjoy earthly pleasures. In Aion, Carl Jung writes, "The ideal of spirituality, striving for the heights, was doomed to clash with the materialistic, earthbound passion to conquer matter and master the world." This change became visible at the time of the Renaissance. The word means rebirth, and it referred to the renewal of the antique spirit. We know today that this spirit was chiefly a mask. It was not the spirit of antiquity that was reborn, but the spirit of medieval Christianity that underwent strange pagan transformations, exchanging the heavenly goal for an earthly one, and the vertical of the Gothic style for a horizontal perspective, voyages of discovery, exploration of the world and of nature. The subsequent developments that led to the Enlightenment and the French Revolution have produced a worldwide situation today, which can only be called anti-Christian, in a sense that confirms the early Christian anticipation of the end of time. It is as if, with the coming of Christ, opposites that were latent till then had become manifest, or as if a pendulum had swung violently to one side, and were now carrying out the complementary movement in the opposite direction. No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. Christ is without blemish, but right at the beginning of his career, there occurs the encounter with Satan, the adversary, who represents the counterpole of that tremendous tension in the world's psyche which Christ's advent signified. Both strive for a kingdom, one for the kingdom of heaven, the other for the principatus huius mundi. We hear of a reign of 1,000 years and of a coming of the Antichrist, just as if a partition of worlds and epochs had taken place between two royal brothers. Jung believed that in order to transition into the next age, we would have to reconcile the two opposing forces which had occupied the age of Pisces and integrate the shadow of Christianity. While Jung laid out the complex religious and astrological symbolism which accompanied the great shift which took place leading up to and during the first millennium, Nietzsche understood it perhaps more practically in terms of morality and instinct. Nietzsche called this great shift the first transvaluation of all values, the complete inversion of the classical moral system. He believed that this inversion marked a shift from a life-affirming value system, which exalted and celebrated life, to a system of life-denying morality. For Nietzsche, absolute morality, absolute concepts of good and evil, are inherently anti-life, and arise from an exhausted will which no longer has the strength to say yes to life. Life is fundamentally amoral, and therefore systems which place the good as higher than life must necessarily condemn life and the earthly, which is continually found to be in the wrong, when judged by the standards of the ideal good. During the first transvaluation of values, the pagan values which were overthrown were repressed, and yet they were preserved in the figure of the Antichrist. To the Christians, the nature gods of the classical age took on the look of demons, and the classical virtues became vices. Viewed from this perspective, Jung's so-called anti-Christian age was simply the return of the suppressed pagan values, the return of the classical spirit. The classical empires were ruled by demons, said the Christians. Everything which was once good is now evil. All which was once evil is now good. The lowest shall be the highest, and the first shall be the last. For Nietzsche, what followed this inversion was a slow degeneration, sickening, and dwarfing of mankind, under the disease of Christianity, which seeks to level all great things and attacks the passions and instincts for being amoral, the very forces which drive life towards a higher ideal. For Nietzsche, what was necessary was a second transvaluation of values, a total inversion of all Enlightenment, rationalist, utopian, and life-denying worldviews and values which arose from Christianity, a return to the Greek, Dionysian spirit, a return to the pagan. Nietzsche wrote, "We few or many who again dare to live in a dismoralized world, we pagans in faith, we are probably also the first to grasp what a pagan faith is, to have to imagine higher creatures than man, but beyond good and evil, to have to consider all being higher as also being immoral. We believe in Olympus, and not in the crucified." As we have seen in recent times, the moralist, the good man, is at best an obedient sheep, and at worst the schoolmaster's ruler to crack over the knuckles of those who would dare stand apart from the herd, the leveling, equalization, and homogenization of mankind, and the creation of weak, servile, moral men in service of that end is humanity's greatest danger. If we are to avoid the total collapse of our civilization, we need a higher type of man, like those gleaming heroes of the Bronze Age, to rise above the absolute, life-denying morality of the herd and posit a new, life-affirming goal for mankind. In Will to Power, Nietzsche wrote, "Thus I guessed to what extent a stronger type of man would necessarily have to conceive the elevation and enhancement of man as taking place in another direction. Higher beings, beyond good and evil, beyond those values which cannot deny their origin in the sphere of suffering, the herd, and the majority. I sought in history the beginnings of this construction of reversed ideals, the concepts pagan, classical, noble, newly discovered and expounded. In Thus Spake Zarathustra, Nietzsche chose the character of Zarathustra as his prophet to usher in this reversal of values. In Ecce Homo, Nietzsche wrote, "People have never asked me, as they should have done, what the name of Zarathustra precisely meant in my mouth, in the mouth of the first amoralist. For that which distinguishes this Persian from all others in the past is the very fact that he was the exact reverse of an amoralist. Zarathustra was the first to see in the struggle between good and evil the essential wheel in the working of all things. The translation of morality into the realm of metaphysics as force, cause, end in itself is his work. But the very question suggests its own answer. Zarathustra created this most portentous of all errors, morality. Therefore, he must be the first to expose it, not only because he has had longer and greater experience of the subject than any other thinker, but because of the more important fact that Zarathustra was the most truthful of thinkers. In his teaching alone is truthfulness upheld as the highest virtue. That is to say, as the reverse of the cowardice of the idealist who takes to his heels at the sight of reality. Zarathustra has more pluck in his body than all other thinkers put together, to tell the truth and to aim straight. That is the first Persian virtue. Have I made myself clear? The overcoming of morality by itself, through truthfulness. The moralist's overcoming of himself in his opposite, in me. That is what the name Zarathustra means in my mouth." Nietzsche cites the origin of absolute good and evil in the Persian religion of Zoroastrianism, and thus chose the Zoroastrian prophet Zarathustra as the figure who would overcome all life-denying moralities and posit a new goal for humanity. With Zarathustra as his bow, Nietzsche set his sights upon a new type of man, a man who had overcome the nihilistic, life-suppressing worldview of the herd, the overman. As John the Baptist announced the coming of Christ, Nietzsche and his Zarathustra prepared the way for the overman. As we move into a new age, many other forces are also preparing their great transvaluations, reversals, and resets. But when we look to the heavens, we see that the pole of our earth moves towards the sign of Aquarius. Could it be the new God is a man? As we look to the stars, our gaze returns to the earth, to ourselves. What do we hope for? To be filled with health and vitality, to become beacons of beauty and power. And what is in this new man's overflowing jar? Perhaps a flood to cleanse the earth of nihilism? Perhaps an intoxicating wine to send man into a Dionysian frenzy? Perhaps a new lust for life?